And we're live with our 161st episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. We're happy to be back. I know we're getting started a little bit late today. That's just because of life, right? But there are a couple of housekeeping items. As always, join Slack if you want to communicate with us. I mean, you're always welcome to communicate through the YouTube chat. Send us articles, send us, whatever you want, throw virtual sheep. I don't know, whatever. But join the Absolute AppSec Slack if you want to go deeper and have some other conversations. There's been a good discussion going on over the last week about static analysis tools and how difficult they are to actually integrate into a pipeline, right? And you and I have lots of opinions and feelings about that, but it turns out that others do that listen to us. So that's good to hear. Outside of that, KernelCon, there's still some seats available for that training at KernelCon. We've been posting out about it. If you haven't heard, we're going to be teaching there end of March. Please come if you are interested in our excellent adventures in secure code review. So yeah, that's our code review course. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, Ken, today that we want to mention before we jump into our stories of being old and being in the industry too long.
No, just that someone had asked with KernelCon, is it just on site? And I don't believe it's a hybrid streaming in person, is it?
I don't think so. I think it is just on site. I mean, if they're forced to go virtual, then everything's virtual. But my understanding is that it's just on site. At least that's what we've agreed to, is on site.
Okay. Well, I sent a response back to that person, and maybe they're watching as well. So hopefully they get that, or that answers their question. So,
and I
need to book my tickets.
Yeah. You and I both, we got to figure out where we have to stay, right? That might be a good thing to figure out this week.
I have stayed there before and liked the hotel I stayed at a lot, so I will dig up which hotel that is and send that over to you. I don't know why we're doing this live, but whatever. So I'll send you. It's because this is when we talk. That's why. This is when we talk.
We catch up.
This podcast. So this is a meeting / podcast where we watch.
Outside of that, I have had a few people ask about our starting an AppSec blog post. I do have a draft of that's written up that I'm going to send over to Ken, and we should have that up. Like, the blog is about there to actually be released to the wider world, and I'm hoping to get it out this week. It's just always, I mean, with Absolute AppSec, if you don't know, this is a labor of love for me and Ken. It's not something that is, that pays any bills or anything like that. It's just, we like to get together and talk AppSec. So hence the reason that we're here. Stuff gets pushed back on the back burner at times. So
yeah,
anyway,
sure. It's not for a lack of love for the podcast. It's just time thing here. So
time commitment, right? Yeah. We've all got other stuff. And I mean, most people understand, right? For sure.
Yeah. We get into it eventually, though. We always do.
Yeah, we do. We always do. We will have another After Dark episode as well. Ken and I just haven't solidified when that's going to be. Might be tomorrow evening, or it might be a week from tomorrow evening. We've just got to figure that out.
Yeah, I actually did get a response from those folks. So they basically said, the folks that we want to collaborate on with After Dark, they're down to do it. So, and I don't want to tease that out yet, or I don't want to give out names and promises yet, but I just need to put some time on their calendar, sync up with you. Once we can get that sorted, I think it'll be a beautiful cross collaboration for this After Dark series that we're running. And I think it'll be the way that we can really do this without upsetting folks or having any hard feelings for having accidentally discovered serious vulns live on a stream. So this is just a way to sort of solve that. I think it's gonna be pretty cool if we can work it out. So
sweet. Yep. Well, that's good. So that's coming down the pipe. That's just a matter of again coordinating schedules and making sure that we can actually launch that. But I think sooner than that, the blog will be up with those posts. I'm also putting together a post of just like I'm in my head calling it absolutely awesome AppSec, right? So just a list of resources that Ken and I go to time and time again. Whether that's newsletters that we've mentioned on the podcast, different blogging mediums, different tools, Discord, right? Like just different places that we go to get news and then also to get advice, right? This was an interesting thing. I was talking with my actually I was talking with my son. I've got a 16-year-old son, right? And he's taking a programming class, and he was talking to a friend, told his friend, oh, well, you should take programming because when we get to the test, the instructor actually has been a programmer in the past. And so he tells them, if you don't know the answer, go Google it, because that's what every programmer does, right?
Fine.
And I was like,
that's
nice.
awesome. Or not, amazing. Yeah.
I know. I'm like, that's brilliant. Because I've told my son that multiple times is a lot of what we do is just knowing how to ask Google or Bing or a search engine for the answer, or someone who's seen a similar problem in the past. Your search engine foo goes a long way to actually, finding default creds, finding, known pages, finding developer documentation, like all that kind of stuff. If you can tease it out quickly, you can be pretty efficient. But I thought it was pretty interesting, that his programming professor was actually, giving props to that, or actually giving time for that during a test, right? Like, oh, go solve this programming problem, but you can use the web if you want to, right?
I mean, it makes sense once because I've had this conversation with others where they're like, which programming language should I learn first? And I'm like, well, I mean, there are ones that are depending on your preference, or if you need to get something done, there might be languages that are better to start with than others. So like, if you're trying to do something kind of like, I want to script up some, I don't know, like stuff to work on AWS or something, or Azure, or I want to, write a script to do something. Who knows? Like that. Okay, if you have a purpose and a reason, then I'll usually, with somebody who's kind of breaking into programming, I'll usually recommend like Python. That's like the one I typically like to recommend as sort of a blanket tool, because it's a good one with the SDK support that it has. It's an easy, I think, to understand programming language, but like ultimately, if it's not like I have a reason for the language that, for the language choice, I always tell people it's probably pretty irrelevant for the most part. Like if you're using one of the major programming languages, it's going to teach you, what is an integer, what is an array, what is maybe it's called a list or a hash, depending on the language you're working with, basically the fundamentals, when to use a loop, when to use exception handling and catch blocks, conditional statements, ternary operators, overriding classes, implementing modules, things like that. These are all pretty like fundamental concepts. So then once you have that stuff down, you can just re-implement it in any language that you choose. I mean, I think that's why it's easy to learn a new language once you've learned one. Maybe I'm actually curious, since you speak both English and German, Seth, do you think because you learned German that it would be easier for you to take how you learn, like the concepts of how you learned that language, and reapply it to learning another language? Is there any overlap whatsoever, or is programming just like?
No, there definitely is, right? Like the structure of language, or the structure of programming language, is built upon the structure of spoken language, right? And it's very much that there's these building blocks of, I mean, I want to call them operators and variables, but it's really just nouns, pronouns, and how you construct a sentence. And like in German, it's a little bit different. There's different rules for it, but applying that to a different language, I mean, in general, that's how I start to think about it, right? Like you start talking about the cases and articles, and sometimes some of the concepts we don't have in English, but I know we have in other languages. And especially speaking again with my son, he did Chinese immersion, right, which is completely different than German or English, but there are concepts that go across that do apply. Yes, it might be characters, but it's also like you're speaking with, someone who's a grandparent or someone. So like, there's just these. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
like
yeah. The short
fundamental
answer is there's
fundamental
fundamental.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to speaking, right? Like there's fundamental things to speaking, to communicating with another person, and with programming language, there's just fundamental things to speaking with a computer, right? I mean, I don't know how far I can push that analogy, right? But on a basic level, you're absolutely right. Um, it's just like learning to do anything, right? Once you kind of get those fundamentals down, you can apply it to different. I mean, I would ask you the same thing about jujitsu, right? Like knowing those fundamentals, probably taking that and learning a different fighting style would make sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I think when wrestlers come into jiu-jitsu, they're both yeah, it's like or I should just say grappling, in the martial arts of grappling. There's like sambo, there's wrestling, there's jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, there's Japanese jiu-jitsu. So there's like, I'm not going to get into the nuances there, but yeah, there are certainly certain concepts that are very much the same. So it is easy, I think, easier once you've learned one, to reapply those fundamentals to the other. Although this is the weird thing too, just like with programming languages, and actually I know for a fact, like with languages like Spanish and Italian, for instance, there's a lot of words that are the same but don't have the same meaning, or
Mm-hmm.
the way you say something. Like it's funny to watch an Italian. Like I had friends when I was in the Navy, when we were stationed overseas in Italy, who were Spanish speakers, who would then try to apply their Spanish with Italians, and they would get pretty far, but then there would be like weird, awkward things where like, what did you say? And it's like, oh, those don't translate the same. So
Yeah.
it's very much like there's nuances, just like from one language, programming language, to another, that you have to get. It can be confusing, is all I'm trying to say. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think it overall
Well,
does help.
yeah, and I mean, you could even go further than that, right? There's different versions of languages, right? So there's different versions of programming languages, but also spoken languages, right? So colloquialisms, or regional dialects, especially in the U.S., right? I mean, there's spoken English, but talking to someone from the deep South is different than talking to someone from upstate New York, or the New England or Midwest, right? Like they just use different terms for things. Germany
Pop,
is even,
cola,
yeah,
Coke, everything's Coke. You want a
Coke,
Sprite? It's a
yep,
Coke.
Coke, yeah. Do you want a Coke? Yeah, and yeah, so in German it's very much the same too, right? There's kind of regional dialects that are spoken. There's Swiss German, which is crazy if you only speak Hochdeutsch, which is like kind of the high German standard language, right? And like Austrian is a little bit different. Like even though you can communicate, just like in the case that you're talking about, those basics remain the same. How you actually implement them, and my analogy here, right? Like, is okay if you talk about Python and just using like the print statement, right? From version 2 to version 3, you have to change how it's actually called in order to
Yes.
execute, right?
I
So,
forgot about that. Yeah.
yeah, so there are definitely differences there, and then there's weaknesses, like the flaws that occur, in spoken language, also directly. Well, I mean, we could apply this analogy to how actually vulnerabilities pop up in code because of that misunderstanding. And I know we're going to review this article in a little bit when we're talking about different programming languages and passing validation from one language into another language. Those misunderstandings resulted in actual loss of money in this case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Which I can certainly post that article. I mean, this is a good segue for sure into, you know, uh, some sort of interest. And like you and I were talking, and we neither of us had a ton of time to get up to speed on this article. Again, just sort of busy these days. But upon a cursory glance, it if at a high overview level, it sounds like there was I guess ETH is like Ethereum coin, basically, on the Solana blockchain.
Okay.
And it sounded like it was moved. So an attacker created some coins on the Solana blockchain. But there was, so one is built in Solidity and one is built in Rust. I think Solana might be Rust. I actually have to, let me verify that. Attack was hard for me to wrap my head around because it was initiated on the Solana blockchain, which uses, so Solana uses Rust, Ethereum blockchain uses Solidity. And there was an issue where the signature, there's a function called verify. Let me find the technical. All right, so there's a verify signature function, and it's supposed to take cryptographic signatures, bundle them together. Doesn't actually verify signatures itself, which is interesting. Let's see. The version of the Solana program Wormhole was using didn't correctly verify the address, which allowed the hacker to create an account that could bypass all of the checks. Ultimately, what this hacker did was they created their own signature set, uploaded that, created the tokens, passed this check, and transferred out coins that weren't real and didn't really exist over to, I think, the Ethereum blockchain. And again, this is like hard for me to. It's just because like I just read this like. You saw it in the span of like a minute. I kind of glossed over this, but so this is all hot take stuff for sure. You should definitely read this article yourself. But it's pretty. I wanted to bring it up because I think it's very interesting. I mean, obviously, like I'm these days pretty interested in cryptocurrency, and I think a lot of people are. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are. I actually read an article that said that the majority of millennials have more trust in the blockchain than they do the traditional. And I don't know if this is true. How could I know? But that's what I read, is that, yeah, millennials are more, they feel safer to put their money into cryptocurrency than they do the traditional infrastructure, like stocks, things like that.
Traditional investments.
Yeah, which is pretty interesting.
Wait. Did you read it on the internet? It's got to be true.
Well, it was blockchain verified, so it should be
yeah,
good.
there you
go. Hopefully my dog doesn't freak out. There's a FedEx truck here, and she might start barking, so we'll see. No, but I just think it's interesting. You have two different blockchains built on different languages, using a function that was, it's like, how many functions have we seen where they're named a thing and they don't do that thing at all, which is a smell and an issue. But this looked like a little bit more of a complicated sort of attack. So I'm not sure if do you have any thoughts on this one yourself about how this all went down and just in general?
Yeah. I mean, in general, this is the kind of blockchain attack that I know we've been talking about for a while, right? Like this is kind of the idea that they probably didn't do a proper threat model on this process and then dig into each of the validations to make sure that they were happening as expected. I don't know. This is difficult though, because they were using a native program, right? On Solana to do that. But, verify signatures was only, it looks like it was just verifying that the signature was valid, not necessarily whether the signatures matched what they expected, which is a pretty common problem with these like wallet. I mean, wallet holders, right? Like that's, I don't know how else to classify them, right? But it's you go to Coinbase or, one of the other providers and they have a wallet that is associated with you, with your credentials, right? Custodial wallet. That's what I want to say. Right.
Right.
And then they pass things back and forth through their own wallets that are on the blockchain as well. And somehow that verify signatures didn't get written out properly or didn't actually validate those accounts, I guess is what's going on here. Yeah. So it didn't verify the address. It verified that there was a valid signature on that, for that wallet. That's what it seems like to me.
Which they made valid by passing in.
Yeah, because they created one and then passed in their own signature. That's what they checked. And then hence the reason they were able to bypass those signature checks and pull those Ethereum. Yeah. Yep.
What's interesting is the
coins over to Ethereum. What?
Well, I think it's interesting. The Wormhole so this is from the Wormhole officials. They embedded it in the Ethereum transaction sent to the attacker's account. It said, "We noticed you were able to exploit the Solana VAA verification and mint tokens. We'd like to offer you a white hat agreement and present you with a bug bounty of $10 million for exploit details and returning the the Wormhole Ethereum that you've minted. You can reach out to us. You can reach out to us at certus.one." Okay, we'll see how that goes. Good luck. I don't think you're going to hear back from that attacker.
$10 million versus how much? $380 million, something like that.
Yeah. Good luck with that. So, or 323 million. But yes, who's counting at that point? I'd say above 300 million. Who's counting? Yeah, it's ridiculous, man. That's pretty amazing. Although, I don't know, man. I'm pretty interested in cryptocurrency these days, and especially after like we had that episode a few episodes back with talking about oh gosh, what's his face? The one who wrote Signal, Moxie's NFT article. Man, I'm having senior moments all over the place. Yeah, that was a fun one. Cool. So, do you?
Sorry, yeah, I started reading through the comments, and anyway,
don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah, on that article, we'll skip that. Okay, the next thing that we wanted to jump into was pen testing stories. We thought this would be fun. This was on our list from last week, but there's this Twitter thread that was out there. It's a couple weeks old, but if you haven't read it, there's a lot of good, just like experiences during or craziest pen test stories, what you hear in there, right? Like a lot of companies doing crazy things. And as we get into it, I do want to caveat this with not all companies have these sorts of problems, right? But when you do run into them, it's pretty jarring as a penetration tester when you're able to do some of the stuff that's listed in these threads. And so, that's where I wanted to start with you is, okay, like if I ask you, what is your craziest pen testing story? Like, what is it that you think of?
Oh man, I have a lot of stories, but I guess actually it's not even an AppSec one. It's a physical pen test that I did. That was like, I honestly, like, I loved it. I think the physical security stuff is super fun. But like, so for me, so it was me and somebody else who at the time was a friend and a colleague. We went down to, this was years ago. We went down to the South, I'll say, where there is a large, there's like a couple companies in the US that basically have everybody's personal data. And this was one of those companies. And so we went down there, and the goal was to, basically there's a data center and all that's where all that data's at. The goal was to sort of break in there. There's a couple buildings, but anyways, one was the main like data storage. One was where like where everybody works and builds stuff out of and has access to stuff. Now the building that was the first building that was our target was interesting because it had, as you look at it, it had a like the whole entrance where you have sort of, what's it called when man trap is I think what they call it, where trap. You have you got a camera, you got a badge in, you go through, once that door closes, then you can badge in again. And then the next set of doors opens. If you've gotten through that far, you're usually pretty good. Security desk as you come in. But again, if you've gotten through those two checkpoints and you're wearing a badge, it's pretty good. They obviously are they have signs that say, don't tailgate people, don't do that. It's not allowed. However, the South is friendly, man. This is just how they are. They're very friendly people. So that's one thing. The other thing that was interesting about this building is that even though you had that like initial man-trappy style entrance, you could actually just walk across, walk behind the building. And that's where people go out to smoke. and then they come back in through that through the backside, which has none of the man trap stuff, right? Just regular, just walk in. So that's where we're kind of starting. So for recon, we went through, and I remember sitting in a parking lot. It was pretty cold, and I've got a camera, and I'm like trying to take pictures of the facility, of people entering, of badges. We would go to the smoke area. Neither of us smoked. I don't smoke, but you could go over there, hold a cigarette. Like, we got like cigarettes, and just held a cigarette, and we're on the phone, but really on the phone taking pictures of people's badges as they were taking a smoke break. So, and obviously back then I looked very much more normal. I didn't rock a mohawk and stuff, so it was very like vanilla, unassuming.
Very, very corporate. Yeah.
Very corporate with my Kohl's khaki pants and stuff like that. So anyways, so we roll up, we do all this recon. We brought a portable badge maker with us. So then once we got all the info of like where the entrances are, how to get in, the kind of procedures, at one point a security team or a security guard, physical security guard doing patrol actually did stop me, asked what I was doing. I don't remember. I made up something. They were like, you need to get out of here. So I did. I left. I was in a rental car. By that time, it was fine. We had enough information. So we went back, created a fake badge for the other person that I was doing this engagement with. And they, next day, how we planned this was that person was going to go to the back area where there was a smoke deck. And like I said, just walk to the back of the building. And he had dressed in like a nice businessy executive looking suit, right? Again, fake cigarette, or, cigarette, not actually smoking it thing, trick. And then he's on the phone and he's like, whatever. So he's got that fake badge. Now, it doesn't look super realistic, but it looks enough to be convincing. He kind of like had it on a lanyard and then tucked into a pocket. So, but it's enough of it poking out that it looked kind of legit. So then I went up to the man trap and I buzzed in as a guest. So then I just said, I'm waiting for my contact. We're in the lobby area. So as we're in the lobby area, I tell him, here's the phone number of my contact. I give him the cell phone number of my counterpart who's in the back. So he calls him. He's like, oh yeah, I'll come in there. No problem. I'll be in there in a minute. I'll come grab him. So he just tailgates the next he's on the phone and he's acting like it's like a heated exchange on the phone. So the person in front of him doesn't really or like it's not heated, but like important, right? Like important executive business. So he's on the phone and he's like, having this conversation, and the person lets him tailgate in because he's like, this guy's got an important phone call. He's clearly an executive looking guy. He's got a badge. He was on the smoke deck where I was at. He's got to work here. So he comes in, meets me in the lobby, and say, this is my contact. Guy's like, okay, the front security guard doesn't check his badge. He just signs in real quick. And again, he's doing the phone thing. So he's like, yeah. Oh no, I'll sign him in. I got, like he's really busy, really pressed for time. The security guard didn't want to like bother him to like pull out his badge. So that was our first hurdle. But like really, if you're at the security desk, you look and like you're the security guard. If you look up to your right, there's like stairs. So you go right up to the stairs that are visible. There's like a landing area, and then there's doors to get in at that point. So now we have our next hurdle, which is we don't have real badges. We need to get in through this, get past this landing stage, which is within sight of the security desk. So if anybody calls us on anything, security's right there. They're going to come right up and say something. So what we do is we just hang out in the landing area, talk as if we're talking about business, and we wait for somebody who seems like they're basically a timid person or somebody who's overly nice and wouldn't, want to confront us about our badge status. So we picked out our target. That person was like, the door was about to close, or they opened the door and they held it or whatever. We came up real quick, like, oh, like we've got business. We've got to go. And he's doing his executive thing. That whole persona. Nearly get stopped. This is where it got really scary because this person nearly said something. You could see it on her face. She wanted to. And I was just like, oh, thank you so much. We got so much, stuff going on, yeah, thanks. And just kept walking. Right. So then the next step is we need to actually get into, so now we've gotten to this main corridor where people like push code, do all this stuff that's, like pretty sensitive. But also, this is where the security team's desk is. Now this is our third hurdle. We now need to get into the security team's area. Thankfully, that door, someone just happened to they just opened it, didn't even look behind him. We just walked right in. We were like waiting in a little kitchen area, where they have like chocolate milk and coffee and all that stuff. It's like right, yeah, exactly. It's right across from the door that we need to go into. So as soon as we're like hanging out, as soon as we see that person go in, that door is just kind of slowly closing. We just grab it, walk in. Then we just walk over to the security team's desk. We find them because we knew, we had met the security team before. And we just sit there and they're like, hey, what's going on? We're like, yeah, hey, what's going on? They're looking at us. We're looking at them. Like, I mean, what are you guys here for? And we're like,
what do you mean?
And they're like, where's your, they go, do you guys, who brought you in here? Who's your escort? We're like, that's the point. And they're like, wait, did nobody put you? And then we're like, yeah, so and their desks, like their computers are open. There's only one security person there. The rest of them had walked away to do something, and it was just hilarious. It was like this realize that you saw the wheels start to turn and them start to realize, oh no, this is really terrible. Holy cow! And so that was probably my most, because that was a multi-day, like when I've condensed that story, but it was like a couple of days of reconnaissance. I mean, we're talking about late at night. One time we were out late at night trying to recon the backside to understand how the entrance looked and how the layout was set up. And like a dog, like a wild dog or something starts, because there's no houses around there, starts barking. We don't know if it's like, I don't know, with the wildlife around there. I think it's a dog. So there's like all these like roadblocks to getting into, but it was the funnest thing ever, man. That's honestly, I got the biggest thrill of my life doing that pen test. That was super fun.
Yeah, I mean, those ones are always good, like the physical ones for sure, right? Like that, you get like that feeling of, yeah, I mean the dopamine hit, because there's physical danger as opposed to just like virtual, which isn't quite the same, right?
No.
But it still can be pretty good. I was trying to decide which story I should jump into, right? Like,
yeah, I was going to ask you.
Yeah, I don't know how far I want to go back, right? I'm trying to decide which one would be good. Like, if I should dig into something like from my high school days, because we did all sorts of stuff that nowadays would be completely frowned upon. Yeah, I don't know. One of my favorite experiences after I first got into security, right, was so I was doing pen testing for a bank, right, out west, in the Western US, and they wanted us to review the ATMs, right, and their ATM network, as far as how the ATMs were connecting to the mainframe. If there was any way to actually, man in the middle those devices, if you could get physical access to them, right? And so I mean, this is back when like even just setting up certs was a huge problem. So most of the streams were all just plain text. You would see creds flying back and forth. It was all like, so it was pretty dangerous stuff.
For an ATM network? Is that what you're saying?
For an ATM network, right?
Like, oh my goodness, that's terrible.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like, I mean, if you look at those old, yeah. Anyway, I mean, this was,
if you want to know why compliance standards exist, this is exactly
why. Yeah. I mean, they had upgraded a bunch, but anyway, so we get into the ATM lab, and we're looking at an ATM, pop a switch in there, or not a switch, but a hub, so we can do some man in the middle attacks. I fire up, what's the name of it? I want to say Ethereal, but that's not it, right? That's Wireshark. That's Wireshark, but Ettercap, right?
Oh, okay.
So that's the old man in the middle utility command line. And I'm just on a hub, right? And so like we start to like, I turn it on. I just basically say, capture all the traffic that you can, and broadcast out that you're the router for the subnet, right? Because I'm like, and to myself, I'm like, oh yeah, we're on a QA network, like we should be able to see everything, and so we start to run down this rabbit hole, and we're reviewing the traffic, but But I made a fatal mistake in assuming that we were, that it was only a QA network, right? So, so within like, we were in this lab for 15 minutes or so. I'm running this, I'm running Ettercap through my little, crappy HP laptop, right? That's got Linux running on it. And then I get a call, all of a sudden the phone rings in the lab, and I'm like, okay, that's weird, right? And we pick it up, and it's one of the networking guys from the networking team. He's like, hey, what are you guys doing? And we're like, oh, well, we're running this test, and da-da-da-da. I'm like, oh, they detected that there was some man in the middle broadcasting that's going on. And he's like, yeah, you realize that router handles the traffic for our production ATM network as well, right? And I'm like, oh, shit. Yeah, I'm going to turn that off right now. So basically, we're talking like a I was redirecting traffic for basically all of the ATMs, like all of the production ATMs on this, and slowing down like everything. Like there was just no controls in place, right? Like, in between QA and production in this scenario. But I was routing all the traffic for a large bank in the Western US, thousands of ATM nodes. All that ATM traffic was flowing through my little crappy laptop that was not meant to handle that amount of traffic, right? But it did, right? Because it was Linux, it was fine. But they did notice a slowdown in traffic because because I'd actually put that into place, right? So that was
the
kind
ramifications of what you could have done, though, are who cares about the slowdown? I mean, that's ridiculous. Exactly. You could just redirect everything to your server, and you could just, you just have everything, all the data. All of the data.
Well, and that was it, right? Because like I was saying, it was like unencrypted at the time. Like we were targeting the QA or the staging instance of the mainframe, right? So that's all that we had been looking at, was the traffic that was going back there. But Ettercap and those tools are those are powerful, right? Like, and so being able to actually see, had I wanted to target production, I could have. And I could have started to transfer money or do all this other stuff, because again, like I was saying, it's all plain text protocols back then. There wasn't a lot of, if you could talk to the mainframe on that specific port before they had integrated any of the, SSL at that time, it was game over, right? Because you could just send an instruction to say, take money from this account, put it in that account. And the mainframe would be like, okay, let's do it, right? Like that was basically the level of instruction that was there, or the level of protection. So that was kind of a fun one, right? Like that was one of those, okay, I really need to make sure on, what exactly I'm responding to and how I'm using these tools when you're in environments that you don't necessarily use yourself. So yeah, it was fun.
I could tell you one of maybe I've told this on the podcast before. I actually don't know. Who could remember? We're on our 161st episode, but
that's what I was trying to remember. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't even know if I mentioned it, but no, this is actually just really short. There was a military supply website, and we were supposed to be. I think I have actually mentioned this before, but I don't know. Whatever. So it was supposed to be a QA site, QA site. But again, there's a difference between QA site with production data and a QA site with QA data, right? So this apparently was the former QA site with production data. We weren't aware of that. Also, what we weren't aware of is that they decided to have a delete user function. And the delete user function acts on a GET request. So if you just click the link, well, if you click, and this is what confused the developers so heavily. They were like, well, what we ended up doing was deleting everything out of their database, like deleting all users or something like that. And they were super confused on how a tool could accidentally delete thousands of records. And we were like, well, we had spidering on. So, let's look at how your delete user function's working. We're like, yeah, it's a GET request. If you click on the link, yes, it'll have a JavaScript pop-up if you're using the website, but a spider doesn't care about your JavaScript pop-up at all. It just sees a link, and then it sends a GET request to that link, because no state-changing operation should be occurring over a GET request. Certainly not without a CSRF token, obviously. So the two, but at the end of the day, this was a DoD, so it was like, oh, the security people are the ones who are at fault at first, anyways. Until we were like, no, you don't design websites like this. You have a much bigger problem. Like who's writing your website? Like who are your programmers? That's where it got a little dicey. But that was probably like one of the more hilarious, basically not well crafted sites that are vulnerable to the dumbest stuff and it shouldn't have happened. It was just like somebody decided to write a website like that, so what can you do?
Yep. Well, I mean, that sounds similar. Actually, I'm pretty sure VTM has that same problem.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Well, it's purposefully vulnerable.
Because purposely burnt vulnerable.
Yeah.
But that was, like it was one of those that I like intentionally put in there. But I've run into problems in the past with that because I try to I'm like, oh, I'm just going to scan it with burp or whatever, right? And all of a sudden, like all the data's gone, and I was like, oh, damn it, that's right. Like I forgot that we put that in there.
I feel like today's software developers are probably much better about this, but I will say, like in the earlier days of you and I testing, it was like a mystery to developers as to how we were able to bypass their controls that written in JavaScript. It was like magic. I think nowadays developers are a little bit more aware of this, especially given the proliferation of developer tools embedded within the browser, where it allows you to modify things on the page, and then a lot of developers use that. So I would assume that's not as much of a thing these days, but it certainly was back then. People were like, "Whoa, wait, you can get past my JavaScript." Yeah, exactly. So.
Well, and like I don't have those discussions quite as often, right? But in the trainings that we would give right back in the fishnet days, that was always a huge module. Was let's talk about HTTP and what the protocol actually is, how you intercept traffic, how you can see and manipulate things, right? Because the developers wouldn't necessarily understand what that communication mechanism was. They thought it was all a closed system, to your point, right? And the fact that it was open was a huge, huge problem.
Yep.
Well, that's a cool one. The other one that I was going to share, I don't know if I've shared this one on the podcast before, but it honestly, like, it was my introduction into security, quote unquote security, right? Like back in my high school days, right? Like, and I think you've heard this one before, right? But there was a system that all right. So yeah. Okay. Nowadays, like your kid doesn't go to school. You get an email, you get a phone call about it. They tell you, hey, you know what? Your son or daughter didn't show up today. You need to you need to clear the absence or whatever it was. So when I was going to high school, the school district decided to implement something along those lines. And this is in the early 90s. This is new technology. They don't necessarily know. I mean, you got a secretary at the district office that's actually implementing this, and they load in like the attendance secretary in the office loads in the attendance records every day, and it would call home. And of course, as a high school student, we're skipping out or we're doing other things. We don't want our parents to know what's actually going on, and it's always a pain to go home and actually catch that call as it's coming in, because there was only the one call that was actually happening. But the nice thing is that message board, or that the system that made those calls, also was a message board system. So you could call up and get like the announcements for the day or whatever else. And us being, like we had been at this point, we had been war dialing, right? Like, we were scanning numbers, doing all sorts of stuff with our computers and our modems. And we figured out, okay, that's the number that we call up, and then we can interact with that system. So I think it was like you press 1 for, the announcements for the day. And then there was other options. We're like, okay, so if you can press 1, what happens when you press the star key, right? Or the pound key on your phone? And what happened was you press, I think it was pound. You press pound and it asks you, all right, what's the administrator code, right? And we're like, okay, so there's an administrative functionality that's associated with this message board. You access it by pressing pound and then giving it a 4-digit number, right? Okay. And we're like, okay, all right. well, what can we do as an administrator? Let's actually figure that out. But we needed the administrator code. Couldn't see that on anybody's desk or anything like that. And so all we did, there was 4 of us, is we split up the numbers from 0 to 2,500 to whatever, and spent one afternoon going through every single option that was available, right? So you'd push 0000, it would say no, 0001. And I think it would kick you off after about 5 or 6 tries. So you'd have to dial back up. But that was the only prevention. But we were able to brute force that 4-digit number and access the administrative functionality of the application. And what we know, once you got into it, one of the options was actually doing a factory reset of the system.
Oh, that's messed up.
So it was in there somewhere. We had to figure out what it actually is. But when you did a factory reset, it would clear out whatever numbers were in there, and they were just reloading things every day as it was. And so what it came down to is we'd skip school, one of us or whoever, whatever in our group, we'd notify whoever it was that was on for the day. They would go in at 3:00 or whatever after the secretaries had left for the day and it was starting the call out process, reset the system, and they wouldn't know, right? It would just basically flush everything out. I mean, I'm pretty sure it would clear out all the different announcements and things like that. But we didn't care because they couldn't trace it back to us at that point, right? And so that was my introduction to, okay, we're brute forcing, we're fine, we're determining how an application actually works. Granted, the interface was all through the phone keypad at that point, but it was a real good exercise in, wow, what can you get away with if you have access to a system and they don't put controls in place, right? So
yeah, it's funny you say that because I was not a fan of school, and in high school. I wish I had that solution. Mine was less elegant. It was to go talk to a counselor about nothing in particular, but make sure it's at the tail end of lunch. And then we had block scheduling. So it was 90 minutes. And then, so the after lunch is basically the remainder of my day. So I just extend that conversation a few minutes past into the class and be like, all right, I got to go take the little pass. And that it says that the counselor would give you, go take it to the staff. They're right in the same hallway. They would just be like, okay, you're excused for this hour, not for being tardy. So that when the teacher, and you have to time it too. So the teacher has already taken attendance. But anyways, or no, I'm sorry. No, it didn't matter. Sorry. They took attendance. They're going to mark you as absent. But you get your little note. Presumably, you're supposed to go back to class. Don't do that because they've already marked you okay for the hour. And that's how I got away with, this is not an exaggeration, ditching pretty much half of my junior and senior year until they got on and I got in trouble. But it's whatever. I still graduated. But there's got to be something about the mindset of for people who do what we do, or we don't much care for structure and find ways around things.
Well, and I mean, that was it, right? I was okay, what were we doing when we were skipping class? We would go to the library, or we went to we did the geekiest things. It wasn't we were going out doing, committing crimes or anything. We're going to the planetarium, right? I'm oh man,
actual learning occurs.
Actual learning, yeah. We were doing, I mean, honestly, we were doing research on computer stuff. We were, all right, it was, it's all directly contributed to, career path and everything at this point. But back then there was no way to actually find it. Yeah. Anyway, so it was, they were fun times, but it was,
yeah. I think that's part of why I went in the military, man. It gave me some structure that I couldn't get around.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to try really. No, but yeah, that's interesting to hear, man. Those are some pretty fun stories. I mean,
yeah,
I think if I look back at the earliest because this came up recently, the earliest example of getting around things was when I was brand new teenager. And I told my wife this story within the last week, and she she was like, what? But basically, we lived in an apartment complex. The gym and the main office were connected. They had amazing cookies during the holiday time in the main office part. And what I learned is that the locks from the gym side of things, like the little small gyms that they have, it was like the deadbolt was open and like an open space about this big. And so I just took a butter knife and I could like unlock it. And me and my little brother, we just go to the gym. We would make sure, nobody's in there, nobody's using it. We just use that butter knife to like slide the bolt open, and then we just go in and just eat cookies. This is awesome.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, just dumb stuff like that. So that's probably the earliest that I can remember of just getting, and that honestly, I will say things like that. We joke about, we laugh about, but it's things like that I can honestly say I can point back to and be like, oh, this was an early sign. And something that like that feeling of like, oh, I broke through a control and I got what I wanted. It's dumb stuff like that really does shape, who you become later in life and, is a part of who you are. So.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, it's hard to get, angry with the kids when they bypass some of the controls that I put into place. Right. Like because of that. Right. Because we all have that, like, at some level that you don't want to be controlled, or that it is somewhat appropriate to push back against those boundaries. So anyway,
yes. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Now I'm doing research into that company that, actually ran that software that, or wrote that software that I broke into. So it got acquired at some point, but
they all do.
Yeah.
Or go out of business.
Good.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have other stories, right, for those listeners that are out there, please, jump into Slack, share your best pen testing stories with us, or with us on Twitter or wherever else, right? Like, we love to hear that stuff as we're moving through. Or if you have a specific topic that you want us to speak on, please reach out, join the conversation. Yeah. Otherwise, I think we're about up for time today. I know we started a little bit late, but we're going a little bit late too. So
sure. Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks everybody for listening to our weird little stories.
For the rants of the day. But we'll be back next week, and watch for the blog posts and notifications or announcements on After Dark episodes.
I think I'm going to try and line up Mike for next Tuesday. Okay. But we'll talk more about that. Cool.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.
Thanks.